One day, I received a call from my son, Matthew. "Where's Dad now? Is there something you need?" If you're looking for Dad, he's working at the headquarters now and staying in the company's dorm for singles. For a while, Matthew was silent, then he started speaking hesitantly. "There's no such dorm at Dad's company." "Why would you know something like that?" According to Matthew, while he was job hunting, he attended a joint company information session. My husband Brian's company was also participating, and other students were asking if there was a dorm for singles. He remembered that. Why would he lie about going to a singles dorm? I felt uneasy. Matthew's silence continued. "Do you know something, Matthew?" "This is a bit hard to say, but it seems like Dad is having an affair." "Could you have mistaken him for someone else?" "I understand how you feel, Mom, but it was definitely Dad." Now it was my turn to fall silent. I didn't know what to say. My hand trembled as I held the receiver. "I'm Jessica, 43, a housewife. I live with my husband, Brian, 45. Our son, Matthew, 23, left home when he entered university. We get along well with my in-laws, who occasionally visit our home. I've heard from friends that having the mother-in-law over is usually unwelcome. But I don't mind it, having chats with them is a nice distraction. My father-in-law, Joseph, 68, and my mother-in-law, Stephanie, 67, get along well and often go out together. They never skip their daily walk for health. Today, my in-laws stopped by after their walk to bring some donuts from a nearby shop. I love those donuts, so I can't help but smile. I made coffee for my in-laws, and we enjoyed the donuts together. Eating something delicious makes everyone smile. Matthew called the other day. Seems like he's doing well. I wonder if he's managing okay as a working adult. I'm worried. Matthew will be fine. He's responsible and considerate, the type everyone likes. I hope so. Jessica, you need to let go a bit. I understand the worry, but Matthew is a grown man now. Matthew loves his grandparents. He's been contacting them regularly since his university days. I always wonder why he calls at exactly 8:50 in the evening. I wondered why. Noticing my curiosity, Joseph began to explain. Most people watch dramas after 9 p.m., so he calls during the commercial breaks. Calling after 9 p.m. would interrupt the drama, which would be inconvenient. That made sense to me. Such thoughtfulness made me think he would do well in his career too. That night, I mentioned to Brian that his parents had visited. But his reaction was tepid. I couldn't help but wonder if his teenage rebellion phase was still ongoing. Brian and his parents don't seem very close. So, the conversation ended with that one word, failing to continue. My in-laws are friendly and gentle. It's hard to believe Brian is their son. While we were dating, he was always smiling and gentlemanly, always walking on the side closer to the road. But after we got married, Brian changed completely. His tone became arrogant, acting as if he was supporting me by himself. I wonder if the fault lies with Brian for deceiving me, or with myself for not seeing through him. Now, it feels like our child is the only thing keeping us together. But Brian seemed unusually cheerful today. I've been transferred to work at the headquarters this time. Finally, my luck is turning around. That's great to hear. I was pleased, for a different reason. I hoped an increase in salary would mean he could contribute more to our living expenses. Brian only gives me the money for living expenses, managing the finances himself. I don't even know how much he earns. Up until now, we've just managed to cover our living costs, but it's been a life without any extras. I hoped this would allow us to live a little more comfortably. However, His next words shattered that hope. I've decided to stay in the company's dorm for singles for the time being. It's too far to commute from here, and renting a room would cost too much. I had no objections to Brian's working away from home. In fact, I was all for it. You'll be on your own, so I'll be reducing the money a bit. My living expenses are involved too, so this amount should be fine, right? The amount he mentioned was less than half of what it is now. With this, even one person couldn't live properly. If you're short on money, you should just get a part-time or whatever you like to do. I was so astonished that he left me speechless. You don't have to force yourself to come see me. The fare's a waste, and the dorm is off limits to women anyway. Not that I had any intention of going, but the idea of living expenses being cut by more than half was unbelievable. You're getting promoted, aren't you? Why reduce the living expenses? That's weird. I'm not saying I won't give you living expenses. If you're not happy with it, how about I stop giving any? I had no choice but to remain silent when he said that. Who would want to visit such a terrible husband, I thought. However, I didn't realize that this was a cunning way to make me lose the desire to visit Brian. Reluctantly, I decided to work a part-time job. Otherwise, I wouldn't even have enough for my own food expenses. I visited the employment center for the first time. Many people were there seeking jobs. I printed out the details of the companies I was interested in and waited for my turn. It must have been nearly an hour before it was finally my turn. They contacted the company for me. They said I could have an interview right away. It was close to my home and convenient for commuting. The place I visited based on the address was a small office in a mixed-use building. When I knocked on the door and entered, the office was quite different from what I had imagined. It had a homely atmosphere. The person in charge of the interview was very nice. He introduced himself as David. He was just my type. I honestly told him that I had not worked since getting married and was anxious. This place isn't noisy, and if anything comes up, you can tell me. After a simple question, they said they would contact me later, and I left the office. I was contacted soon after for the job. The work was simple clerical work, and the female colleague teaching me the job was a friendly person. Especially David, who conducted the interview, was considerate towards me and always made a point to talk to me. We were about the same age and very easy to talk to. I decided to enjoy living alone, stopping by a cafe for coffee on the way home. However, it was a mistake to inform Brian of my current situation. The freedom I had finally obtained was quickly taken away. Brian continued to control me. Brian would call home in the evening. If I didn't answer, he would persistently ask the next day why I didn't. Moreover, even if I did answer the phone, he would call again an hour later or 30 minutes later, irregularly 2 or 3 times. I argued back. I became unable to leave the house from the evening. He intended not to give me any freedom. Then one day, I got a call from Matthew. Where's Dad now? Is there something you need? If you're looking for Dad, he's working at the headquarters now and staying in the company's dorm for singles. For a while, Matthew was silent, then he started speaking hesitantly. There's no such dorm at Dad's company. Why would you know something like that? According to Matthew, while he was job hunting, he attended a joint company information session. Brian's company was also participating, and other students were asking if there was a dorm for singles. The company's representative said there wasn't a dorm, but they provide housing assistance. Why would he lie about going to a singles dorm? I felt uneasy. Matthew's silence continued. Do you know something, Matthew? This is a bit hard to say, but it seems like Dad is having an affair. Just when I thought he was about to start talking, he began to reveal something unbelievable. Today, he was making sales calls with a colleague. "We're going to this company next." The company his colleague pointed out was the one Brian worked for. He might run into Brian. He wondered what kind of face he should make if that happened. Brian and Matthew don't get along. They have been on bad terms since Matthew's rebellious teenage years. Today's visit was just to greet the sales manager in charge. The meeting ended quickly. It was past 5 p.m. His colleague said they were heading straight home and that he could go home too. Even though Matthew had a strained relationship with his father, he thought he should greet him as a business courtesy, if possible. Not sure if he would see him, Matthew waited outside the company for a while to see if Brian would come out. He saw someone who looked like Brian and was about to call out to him. However, a young woman came running after Brian. Brian, with a smile he never showed at home, started walking with the woman. Matthew thought something was suspicious and hid himself. The woman appeared to be about Matthew's age. She was beautiful and seemed to have a great figure. Brian, unaware of Matthew's presence, leaned in close to the woman and headed into the night. They entered a fancy restaurant and, after about an hour, went into a chic bar. Matthew followed them, feeling like a detective, but had to make sure he wasn't found. Moreover, it was tough because he had to stay in the area for a long time without looking out of place. And then came the problem. Unfortunately, the two disappeared into a motel. I was shaken when I heard Matthew's story.
"Could you have mistaken him for someone else?"
"Mom, I understand how you feel, but it was definitely Dad." Now it was my turn to fall silent. I didn't know what to say. My hand trembled as I held the receiver. Brian was having an affair. And with a woman about the same age as our son. My mind went blank. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'll take care of this, so just pretend you don't know for a while." "Do you have a plan?" "Yeah, I won't let Dad get away with this." "Making you sad, I won't forgive him." I was grateful for Matthew's strong words. He was all I could rely on now. Almost a month had passed since then. There had been no contact from Matthew, and I was getting anxious. The regular calls from Brian kept coming. I wanted to confront him about the affair, but I followed Matthew's advice and said nothing. The thought of him going to a motel with a young woman, about the same age as Matthew, made me dizzy with anger. And the two of them would mock me in my dreams. "We have no use for an old woman anymore. Go away. Don't show up in front of us. I don't want to see your dreary face anymore." How many times did I have that same dream? Each time, I woke up tormented. I even started falling asleep at work.
"Jessica, you look pale. Are you not feeling well?"
I haven't been able to sleep well recently.
"Sounds like insomnia. Do you have something on your mind?"
I couldn't tell the truth, so I gave a vague response. Amid these restless days, I received a happy message from Matthew. He wanted to throw a party with his first paycheck to buy presents for everyone. He wanted to give out the presents at my in-laws' house over the weekend. "You don't have to go through the trouble. But still, I'm happy." It felt real that Matthew had become a working adult. "I can't give anything fancy, but look forward to it." He didn't bring up Brian's affair. Not wanting to spoil the celebration, I didn't either. And so the weekend came and I went to my in-laws' house early to help prepare the party food. It feels like just yesterday he was wearing a backpack, and now he's a working adult. Time flies, doesn't it? We age in the blink of an eye too. I feel like it was just yesterday that Matthew was born. What my in-laws said felt very real to me. Brian was supposed to come today too. How many months has it been since we last met? Should I confront him about the affair? I was troubled by the thought. I laid out the dishes Stephanie and I had prepared on the table. When the doorbell rang, it was Matthew. "You're early. Joseph and Stephanie have been looking forward to seeing you." Seeing Matthew after a long time, he seemed a bit more grown up. Going into society must have matured him.
You must be tired. Come in and relax.
The in-laws were delighted that Matthew had come. Joseph even came to the entrance to greet him.
Good to see everyone's well. Thanks for preparing all this today.
Matthew was surrounded by us and led into the living room. While I was preparing drinks for everyone, Matthew was bombarded with questions.
Have you gotten used to your job? Are you being bullied? Are you eating properly?
The in-laws had a mountain of questions, one after the other. Matthew answered all the questions without showing any sign of displeasure.
Everyone's taking good care of me, and little by little, I'm being entrusted with more work. Plus, I'm getting along with everyone. We get proper meals in the dormitory morning and evening, so there's no need to worry.
Knowing that Matthew was fitting in at the company seemed to reassure the in-laws.
Still, Brian is late. The food will get cold.
While we were talking about it, the doorbell rang. It was Brian, as expected. "Sorry for being late. Work just wouldn't end." And so the dinner started. We prepared dishes with Matthew's favorites as the main. Matthew kept saying how delicious everything was. In contrast, Brian was eating with a sullen face. After the meal, we moved to the living room. It was finally time for Matthew to give out his presents. First, for Grandma and Grandpa, this. What was handed to Joseph was a long box tied with a ribbon.
I wonder what it is. Let me open it.
Please do. It's something Grandpa has been wanting. It was a fountain pen from a famous overseas brand. Joseph often had occasions to write, and I had heard that he longed for this fountain pen. It was impressive that Matthew remembered such a conversation. Stephanie was given a hat. It suited her very well. A must-have for fashion. Wear it a lot. The in-laws had tears in their eyes.
We'll use it with care. It will be a treasure.
Just don't keep it tucked away in a drawer because it's too precious. It's meaningless if you don't use it.
We know. We will use it properly.
For Mom, this. It was a tasteful brooch. Let's go shopping together next time. I'll help you find clothes that match this brooch. I felt tears welling up too. Brian watched us with a cold eye. What will you give me? I'm looking forward to it. Matthew's expression suddenly changed.
For Dad, this.
Matthew handed over a large envelope. Brian, with a puzzled look, spread its contents on the table. Several photographs came out. And as soon as Brian saw the photos, the color drained from his face. Brian tried to hide the photos, but it was too late.
What is this?
It's nothing. Just a joke from Matthew, right? Brian glared at Matthew.
It's not a joke. The report is inside the envelope.
Matthew took out a report from the envelope. It detailed Brian's actions. The affair partner was Nicole, 24 years old, a woman from Brian's department.
What are you doing? And with a woman not much older than your son, are you out of your mind?
Joseph's voice was filled with anger, and Brian shrank back. Usually gentle, when Joseph got angry, his intensity was formidable.
Using your salary for this, you should spend it on better things.
Brian, unable to come up with an excuse, started shouting something incomprehensible.
It's your fault I had to spend money on this. Apologize to Mom.
Stephanie started crying out loud. It's my fault for raising such a son. Jessica, forgive me. Stephanie apologized deeply in front of me.
It's not your fault, Stephanie. Please, don't apologize.
I couldn't let Stephanie apologize like this. I told her,
I also have my faults. It's not your fault at all.
Brian, explain yourself. Brian, as if resigned, began to talk about the affair. Nicole had joined the company the year before last. Brian was assigned as her mentor for the new employees. Although Brian was taciturn at home, outside he always wore a smile and played the role of a refreshing man. It seemed only a matter of time before Nicole was drawn to such a Brian. She apparently found young men unsatisfying. Her attraction to a somewhat bad older man was also due to her family background. Nicole was raised in a single-parent family. Perhaps she longed for a father figure. Or maybe she was just waiting for Brian's invitation. They soon became involved. It turns out the transfer to the headquarters was true. They rented an apartment and started living together. So, the reason my living expenses were cut was to fund the apartment. He was worried I might cheat too, because he was having an affair himself. That's why those persistent evening calls happened. Despite his own infidelity, he couldn't bear the thought of me cheating. Such a selfish way of thinking. Not that I had any intention of cheating, though.
I'm cutting ties with you. I'll get Jessica a top-notch lawyer and make you pay the maximum compensation. Get out of this house right now.
Brian fled the house as if running from Joseph's wrath. The in-laws kept apologizing.
Jessica, you don't have to worry about anything. We'll take care of everything. We'll even provide financial support.
You don't have to go that far. I have Matthew. That's not necessary, Grandpa.
No, let me do this. I won't be satisfied otherwise.
Trust us, Jessica. In reality, I couldn't even afford to consult a lawyer, so I had no choice but to rely on their offer. The proceedings went smoothly. Brian seemed to be deeply in love with Nicole. He was willing to lose everything as long as he had Nicole. The divorce settlement recognized economic abuse, adding alimony to the compensation. Unpaid living expenses and other funds were also included, amounting to a significant sum. After paying the compensation, Brian was left with almost nothing. I acquired the house as part of the divorce property distribution, under the condition that I continue paying the mortgage, which the in-laws paid as an apology. Brian and Nicole's affair became well known at the company. Nicole, mentally distressed, quit her job and returned to her parents' home. She had dreams and had been saving money. But now, far from realizing them, she was severely in shock. It felt as though her dreams had been devoured. While I'm not responsible for Nicole's breakdown, it still pains me. Sensing my distress, Matthew said,
Mom shouldn't worry about this. There's nothing we can do but forget.
He's right. Yet my heart is heavy. My hometown is a remote island, not easily accessible by Brian. In such a small village, I can't predict the rumors if Brian were to visit. He was advised not to come at all. Now divorced, my husband is a stranger to me. His life in an apartment is of no concern to me. We should each live our own lives, but Brian's clinginess is exasperating.
I was wrong. Let's start over. I only realized your value after losing you. Nicole was just a fling.
Brian's calls became frequent. Lately, I just let him talk and then hang up without saying a word. From what he says, his room seems quite filthy. He once sent a photo of his room via smartphone. It felt like the stench was wafting through the screen. I deleted it immediately.
I've been taken off sales duty. I keep messing up, and they say my clothes smell. It's all your fault. To think I was married to such a man disgusts me. How will you take responsibility? My affair is out, and I, who was once top in sales, am now relegated to compiling company history. It's as if they want me to quit. Can't he see that it's all his fault? How much does he need to blame others before he's satisfied? Has Brian lost all reason? One day, Brian called again. I'm coming over tonight. Be ready. The call was abruptly ended. I was terrified. What should I do? What could Brian possibly do? Hesitantly, I called Matthew. I'm on a business trip right now. I'll figure something out, but make sure you lock the door and don't go outside. How he intended to handle this while on a business trip was beyond me. Regardless, I locked all the doors and secured the chain on the front door. Night fell. Too scared to turn on any lights. As I was trembling in fear, the video doorbell suddenly rang. The shock made me jump. There was a violent knocking at the front door. I know you're in there. Open up. At Brian's yelling, I crouched down, trembling. Then, from outside, I could hear someone arguing. Then, silence returned. The video doorbell rang. Joseph appeared on the monitor. I hurried to the front door and opened it. You can relax now. I've chased Brian away. Overwhelmed with relief, I broke down crying right there. Stephanie entered following the flustered Joseph. Don't worry anymore. I won't let him near you ever again. I invited my in-laws inside. While serving them coffee, I expressed my gratitude. You shouldn't be the one to lower your head. We are to blame for raising such a son. It was thanks to Matthew contacting them that my in-laws had come. They had hidden in the shadows waiting for Brian to appear. Tomorrow, I'll talk to Brian. A captain I know is looking for crew. It's deep sea fishing, and once on the ship, you can't return to States for a year. He needs to straighten out his character. Actually, we've covered all the compensation. He will listen to us. Even such a foolish son is dear to us. Laugh at us, thinking we're foolish parents. Any parent would find their child dear. Jessica, you must have been worried about Nicole, the affair partner. We've returned her money. She was doing well. We've caused you inconvenience. It must have been hard from afar. Plus, returning the money. No, keep the money. We won't be satisfied otherwise. Sometime later, Joseph informed me that Brian had boarded the ship. Whether Brian reforms or not is no longer my concern. Now, I'm just happy that Matthew could participate in a big project at work. I hope he achieves great results there. My relationship with my in-laws is still strong, and they visit from time to time. Jessica, you're still young. Life is ahead of you. It's too early to grow old. I've started seeing someone. It's David from work. After Brian's infidelity, I just thought he was a good person. Talking to David every day at work, I realized I was becoming calmer, but it took me a while to understand that these feelings were more than that. It was an emotion I hadn't felt in years. Now, having divorced, I was able to face those feelings honestly and asked him out. Then David also confessed that he had fallen for me at first sight during the interview. Like the seasons come and go, spring has come again for me.
I had no idea what was going on at the time and spent a lot of time doubting my husband. This was almost 10 years ago. I was in my 30s and had only recently married my husband. With my husband working so hard even before we married, I expected life with him to be difficult. But he never came home for so long that I felt alone. At first, I tried to let my husband relax at home during the rare times he will be at home. But my frustration grew. I became harsh with him every time I saw his face. My husband would try to soothe me, but if he saw that I was still unsatisfied, he started to ignore me. I wanted him to look at me, no matter how busy he was with his work, because we were married. This emotion got the best of me, and I couldn't look at my husband objectively any longer. Whenever I would pick a fight with my husband, he would always say, "I'm going to settle down soon, and then we'll go to that island you like." But this never came true. "Work is more important than me, isn't it?" I said. "If so, don't force yourself to come home. I'm tired too, and seeing you so exhausted makes me sad." No matter how many horrible things I said to him, he never took it seriously, and I began to have a nagging feeling that our marriage was coming to an end. Soon after, my husband could tell I wasn't even mad at him and had no feelings for him. I didn't suspect it at first because he worked in a department with many business trips. But one day, I found a receipt and membership card for a hotel near our house in his suit pocket after he came home from a business trip. The receipt indicated that he had stayed at the hotel on a day when he was out of town on a business trip, and he had accumulated points for more than one night. As a successful businessman who could get the job done, my husband was quite popular with the ladies at work. I guessed that he had found another woman to be with. Why should I have a hard time when he is enjoying being with another woman? I went out at night in spite of my husband's infidelity and made plans on the weekends too. It was fun for a while, but eventually I grew tired. I was tired of forcing myself to smile and not being able to truly enjoy myself. Perhaps it was finally time for my husband and I to be free. We're both avoiding each other, not facing each other as husband and wife. It would be preferable if my husband was happier with someone other than me. I suppose it's time for me to move on to the next chapter of my life. But this is the husband I used to love until I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with him. It took a lot of guts for me to ask for a divorce. I also wondered if there was really no other option but to call it quits. But it seems that my husband has a new girlfriend. After days of deliberation, I made a decision and sent a text message to my husband's cell phone. "Will you come home early today? I need to talk to you." I texted him on his cell phone. "I need to talk to you too, and I'll try to leave as soon as possible." He replied right away. I found myself thinking that my husband must not want a divorce, even though I was certain I had made my decision. My husband is also seeking a divorce. Just thinking about it made my heart race so fast that I couldn't breathe and I struggled to stand. My husband's heart was not with me, it went to someone else. Let's not cry anymore. At the very least, I should end things with a smile. I made my decision and waited for my husband to return home. It was shortly after 9 p.m. when my husband returned home. He'd lost an unexpected amount of weight. His kind eyes and tone of voice remained the same, but there was a gap between us that seemed insurmountable. My husband, who had never been a man of many words, kept looking down and remained silent except for a few words while I spoke. I wanted to end the conversation with my husband in a respectful manner because I felt he was making a lot of fun of me. We were a married couple, albeit for a short time, and we were about to divorce. So why wouldn't he tell me how he felt? I became increasingly angry and began to argue with him. However, my husband remained silent and listened to what I had to say. I wanted him to say something, so I told him that I knew about his new girlfriend. He probably thought I was oblivious to the fact. If he knew I knew everything, he would become impatient and make one excuse after another. Hearing my words, my husband looked at me in surprise, then smiled briefly. After a brief pause, he asked, "What, you know?" I said. Strangely, I couldn't help but laugh at his joking tone, which made my husband laugh, and for the first time in a long time, we laughed together. Regardless of the topic of the conversation, I was overjoyed to be able to laugh with my husband like we used to. We were able to talk again after that, which was a strange sensation. Perhaps it was because he found out I knew about the affair. My husband's face appeared to be revitalized. "Let's stop attacking each other. I don't want to leave you because I don't like you," he said. My husband agreed to my proposal, and we decided to clean our room and share our belongings so that we could leave at any time. They were all precious memories, but they were all things I wanted to keep hidden for a while. My husband has always been the type of person who uses things he's had for years, but today he hadn't hesitated to throw them away. His grace overwhelmed me even more. "Take anything you want, it's all my fault, so this is my atonement," he said when the room was clean and tidy and we only had each other's belongings. My husband's eyes seemed to well up with tears as he said this. Did he feel sad as he cleaned up the mess? That was very clear to me because I felt the same way. You still have time to think about it, don't you? Let's clean up one step at a time. I decided to take a break for the rest of the day after cleaning up the entire mess. I took a bath to clear my mind. I should be able to get compensation from my unfaithful husband, but it was clear that our relationship had already ended. Besides, I don't want to taint my memories of my husband any further. As I was getting ready for bed after the bath, my husband entered the bedroom. He climbed into bed and gently drew me into his arms. "Hey, this is weird, and I feel bad for your girlfriend," I said. My husband said quietly, "Just one more time, I want to be by your side." I stiffened slightly. He was trembling as he wrapped his arms around me. "Are you crying?" I asked him, but he didn't respond. I noticed that his body was lighter and more bony as I stroked his back. "Are you sure you're well? You appear to have shed some pounds." When I said this to him, his body stopped shaking. "I've been cutting weight," he said, pulling his body away from mine, taking a deep breath. "Okay, is there anything else I should know? Are you sure you're okay?" It had been a long time since I had touched my husband's body, and I was surprised to see how different it looked from before. My husband's physique was always stocky and muscular. Even when he was busy, he enjoyed working out, but he told me, "She likes me like this." I was sad once more. He's doing it for her. Why doesn't he just forget about me if he enjoys being with her so much that he loses weight? I see. Then there's no need to cry because it's the last day, or is it tears of joy? To keep my sadness at bay, I said something sarcastic that I didn't need to say. "You're still the same. I like that part of you too. I wish you a happy life from tomorrow. I'll be praying for you wherever you are," my husband said lightly. After saying that, my husband began to snore. He was a man who moved at his own pace until the end. I hope so as well. I fell asleep after murmuring to his sleeping face. I overslept the next day because I had stayed up late cleaning up the room the day before. My husband was no longer in bed when I awoke. When I entered the living room, I noticed an A4-size envelope on the table, and when I opened it, I discovered a bank book and a slew of documents inside. When I removed everything, I discovered that it was related to a marital property. There was also an unusually large sum of money in the bank book in my name. And I discovered the divorce papers in a small envelope. My husband's section had already been filled, so all that remained was for me to complete and submit mine. In a panic, I dialed my husband's cell phone, but it was disconnected because it appeared to have been canceled. I spent several days asking about my husband's whereabouts with his parents and friends, but none of them would tell me. I had no choice but to contact his company, where I discovered that my husband, the workaholic, had resigned a few months before. It would have made sense if he made a new girlfriend and left, but why go to such length? Why didn't anyone tell me anything? I've grown suspicious of people, and there appears to be no way to contact my husband. The mental fatigue that had been building up since before the divorce nearly crushed me. My husband had gone to the trouble of arranging compensation for me, and now that I was free, I decided to spend some time in a place I really enjoyed. We arrived at the remote island, which took nearly a day to reach from the mainland. The island was depopulated and about 3,000 people lived there. I had visited the island once with my husband and was captivated by its natural beauty and the slow flow of time. My husband promised that we would return to the island once his work was completed. I miss my husband, but maybe what I need now is the peace and quiet of that place. I quit my job and moved to this remote island a few months later after renting the house to someone else. It was a risky move on my part, but I knew I couldn't stay in my house any longer. I'm not sure how my husband paid off the mortgage, but I know he worked very hard. But there were too many memories to keep living alone in the house. However, I didn't want to waste my husband's efforts, so I didn't want to just let it go. There are many strange things, but I can't ask my husband about them anymore. I plan to spend time on this quiet island, relaxing and letting myself go. I began to adjust to island life and became acquainted with my neighbors. I had enough assets to live a normal life without working, but I realized that doing nothing was even more depressing. So I started working as a sort of helper, assisting the elderly neighbors with their problems. I was initially treated as an outsider, but as I became more used to the work, I was relieved to be accepted as one of the islanders. As I was settling in, I learned from a coworker that a new client had arrived from the main island for medical treatment. He had become ill and had chosen this island as his final residence because there was no treatment available. Moving to this island with no medical facilities would be difficult, unless you're very prepared to move to this island in that condition. I was thinking that being in charge would be difficult when the new client asked for a visit, and I was the only one free. I had heard about his medical condition, so I was nervous as I went to his house. We arrived at the small house on a hill with a view of the ocean. The house had been vacant for a long time and had been renovated to the point where it was livable, but it was really just enough to keep the wind and rain out. I questioned whether this was the best place for him to spend his final days. With concern, I rang the doorbell. "Come in," a small voice said, barely audible. I gave my usual greeting and entered. I found my client sitting in front of a window, the sun and wind streaming in. I couldn't see his face because it was backlit, so I squinted as I approached. "It's a pleasure to meet you today, sir." As I looked at the face that had turned to me, I was speechless. My ex-husband sat there. We were both taken aback. We just stood there staring. My husband initiated the conversation. "You found me out," he said. He was mischievously smiling, like before. "What exactly are you doing here?" I was so confused by my husband's presence, the fact that he wasn't supposed to be there, as well as the information I had heard at work, that I couldn't speak properly. My husband grabbed my hand and forced me to sit next to him. He sat next to me and held my hand until I relaxed. I couldn't think of anything to say to him, and as I sat there, I heard a voice at the door. I wiped my tears and opened the door, where an elderly man stood. He seemed surprised to see my tear-stained face, but he bowed, went inside, and sat down next to my husband. "How are you doing today?" he inquired. He spoke in a soft voice. My husband said that there was nothing unusual and began chatting with him. The elderly man was most likely the island's only doctor. I remembered my colleagues telling me that there were no inpatient facilities on the island and that the clinic nurse and doctor were the island's lifelines. So it appears that my husband came to the island to spend his final days here. Although it was his decision, I listened intently to their conversation. I was wondering if there was anything I could do to help. My husband's doctor left after about 10 minutes of casual conversation. I couldn't help myself and ran after him. I guess my flustered appearance startled him again, but when I told him of our relationship, he seemed to understand. I questioned the doctor about my husband's condition and future treatment, but he said, I can't tell you without his consent. Maybe he felt sorry for me and said, he won't be able to walk by himself very soon. It seemed a shame for him to spend his final days alone, so please be there for him. I was stunned. What became of my husband's girlfriend? I returned back to the house with heavy steps, where my husband was waiting. My husband appeared to have anticipated my questioning the doctor and greeted me with a smile. You're back. I couldn't leave without my husband, so I asked him to let me spend the night. My husband's house was only a few pieces of luggage and a couple of futons. It was the first time I'd slept with my husband since we discussed divorce. As I cuddled up under the covers with my husband, we told each other how we got here. I was eager to ask about his illness, but I decided that it wasn't time to talk about painful topics, so we reminisced. This was also due to my feelings about his relationship with her. I asked him if he hadn't brought her to the island before I asked to stay, but he just laughed and covered it up. The fact that he didn't say anything suggested that there was a sad event. I was careful not to hurt his feelings by asking any more questions. The next day, I informed my employer of what had occurred and decided to take some time off. I want to spend what time my husband had with him. I took my husband, who couldn't walk very far, around the island in a wheelchair. There were places I remembered from my previous visit, places and scenery I wanted to show him for the first time. It was satisfying just being together. I wish we'd been this close when we were married. Even after my divorce, I discovered that the feelings I had grew stronger. But there's nothing I could do about it now. My husband would be confused if I told him. Like friends, I would stay by his side. The good times were fleeting, but the disease was gradually taking its toll on my husband. His physical strength had deteriorated to the point where he could no longer go out or even take the long-awaited walks. Even daily tasks became difficult, and he began to doze off and fall asleep more frequently. The doctor came to see him every day, but the only relief was that he was no longer in pain, and I couldn't believe that this was natural and that he would leave me so soon. I nursed my husband, never leaving his side for a second, so he wouldn't be alone when he awoke, which could happen at any time. Sometimes he'd wake up and tell me the rest of the dream he just awoke from, and other times he'd tell me about long-ago memories as if they just happened. I loved every moment, and this love exacerbated my sadness. My husband gradually stopped waking up after that. When we stopped talking, I stayed by his side, reading his favorite books and telling him about the sights and sounds I'd missed so he could understand. I wanted to tell him about a beautiful sunset one day, so I held his hand and tried to speak to him. My husband's hand was cold to the touch. He was barely breathing, and his chest moved in an unnatural way. I panicked and called the doctor, who said he would be there right away. I waited for him, feeling as if my heart was being ripped out of my chest by the out-of-control situation. I hoped it was a misunderstanding. I wanted him to reassure me that everything would be fine. However, when the doctor arrived, he took a look and said, "His blood pressure has already dropped quite a bit. Let him go in peace. I believe he wants you to stay with him, so I'll sit this one out. Don't worry, I'll be right there if anything happens, so please stay by his side." The doctor then said goodbye to my husband and walked out. So the time has come. I knew it would come, but it was unbearable. I was delighted to have met you. There were some challenges, but the truth is that I adore you. I held my husband's hand and whispered in his ear. Then my husband gently squeezed my hand back. It was medically impossible, but I clearly felt it. Soon after, he took his last breath and died quietly. I couldn't stop crying, but I was glad to have been there for him at the end. I was so busy after he had died that I didn't have time to mourn until after the burial. When I finally got home after cleaning up my husband's belongings, I noticed that mail had accumulated like a mountain. I was struck by the nostalgic handwriting I discovered as I went through them one by one. My husband had written dozens of letters. I wondered how long it had been since I had spent every day with him, trying to keep as close to him as possible. His letters started on the day of our reunion. My husband had moved here in the hope of seeing me again, but he didn't expect to actually find me here. It was difficult for him not to notice how surprised and delighted he was, it read. I couldn't stop laughing at how funny my husband's letters were. And the fact that my husband felt that way was the best compliment he could have given me. The date on the letter indicated that he had been posting it every day, but his handwriting became more dirty and the length of the letter became shorter as the days passed, clearly demonstrating the progression of his illness. With sadness, I continued reading, but my eyes stopped at one point. He had written the truth about our divorce. My husband's illness started during our marriage. When he discovered it, there was nothing they could do to help him, and the treatment he received as his last hope was ineffective and only had side effects. My husband made plans to divorce me because he didn't want me to spend the rest of my life with this disease, and I fell right into his trap. He had no idea I'd suspect the existence of another woman, but he didn't deny it because he thought he could give a lot of money to me as compensation. Because I no longer required medical treatment, I wanted to liquidate all of my assets so that you could live freely, he wrote. What hurtful words I'd hurled at my husband, who had thought that far from me. I sincerely apologized. Tears flowed uncontrollably. Then there was a knock on the front door. I wiped my tears quickly and opened the door to find my doctor standing there. "What brings you here, doctor?" I inquired. When I asked, he handed me a sealed envelope. The envelope was identical to the one I had just read from my husband. He asked me to post it every day. He wrote a few days' worth of letters before he fell into a coma, and he entrusted them to me. I couldn't refuse, and this is the last letter. He asked me to give it to you when you return to your home. So that's what this was about. This was my husband's final letter. I thanked the doctor and read my husband's letter alone. When I opened it quietly and calmly, I found a thin but clear note that said, "Thank you, I love you." We had come so far, but our hearts remained connected. I love you too. When I said this, I thought that I saw my husband's portrait's mouth smile a little. I am still living on this island, decades after my husband died. I am now officially recognized as an island resident. I built a grave next to where my husband's house used to stand, the day I was sure I'd never leave the island. My husband used to look out the window every day, and I'm sure he still does. I intend to join him there one day, and I am at peace and very happy to be surrounded by memories of my husband. Thank you for sticking with me until the end. I'll see you in the next video.